So you mentioned one of the things that we're going to talk about is like communication
Mm.
and how that impacts not only maybe ourselves, people around us, but overall the community. So what are some of the obstacles that maybe people face when trying to communicate, but of course communicate well?
Yeah. So sometimes it's about education that they just don't know how. They haven't been taught properly how. And sometimes it's because there is pain in the way. So when they're facing hard conversations or wanting to stand up for themselves or speak up for themselves, then they revert back into their old, unhealed pain story. And so if they were raised in an environment that wasn't super empathetic, loving, kind, they might get really triggered when things get hard. And then that trigger changes their physiology and it makes them behave and react in a way that is not a way that they're proud of.
I think I've experienced that, but
Mm.
I haven't experienced that lately. I experienced that when I was, let's say, in my 20s. I can remember a time where I was trying to communicate with someone and I knew that it was coming out wrong,
Mm.
but I was either too naive, too arrogant, or too foolish to realize it was coming out wrong. So I just said that, you know what? I'm gonna commit to this thing all the way until the wheels fall off. And I committed to it. I committed to it. And then afterwards, you see on the person's face, they're like, yeah, we all know that that was the worst way to say what I was trying to say. What are maybe some of the tips that we can find out that, okay, I've caught myself saying something that isn't the best way to say it, but I either going to commit to it fully and be that jackass, or I'm going to say, okay, let me take a step back and let me try to say it in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that goes on inside us. I heard it said so clearly a while back, several years ago. Someone was just like, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?" So having the humbleness to stop and say, "Yeah, I'm not doing a good job of this. I'm possibly creating pain as I'm trying to do this." That's on me to adapt the way that I'm communicating or the message that I'm trying to say so that my recipient gets it and can take it on. That's on the speaker, that's on the communicator to adapt. And it can take you kind of have to brush your ego aside and say, you know what? I thought I was right in communicating it this way. Maybe I'm not right. Here's a great example. Okay, this is from my marriage. I've been married 16 years now, and when I first was dating this guy, when I would talk and tell stories, he would make this gesture like get on with it, get to the point. And I was like, that is so rude. And after that, like frustrating, angry argument happened more than once, I was like, maybe I'm the one being rude. Like, he doesn't want to be communicated this way. So I changed my strategy. And now it's like headlines like this. It's like, I took the dog to the vet today. She's fine. And he'll be like, cool. And if he wants further details, he's going to ask for them. If he doesn't care, then he won't, and we're fine. I was still heard. My message got across in a way that he could understand. And now we're happy.
Do you think sometimes it's just as simple as that, where we just need to simplify what we're trying to say instead of trying to overcomplicate it?
I think that's really big. And I think a lot of people have the need to share a lot and fast. I have one friend who everything she says, she has to has an explanation for why she did that thing. Every single thing. So, how was your weekend? Which could be like a simple, yeah, it was really good. I had a great time. Ends up being this 5-10 minute explanation of like why she made every single choice she made that weekend. And it's not necessary, it's overcomplicated. And again, if I want more information, I can ask for information. So, I think you're spot on. I think we can simplify, make our messages more clear. And I think that simplification has to come from a lot of conscious intention because if I'm thinking into old Tonia who before I, got a lot of trauma out of my body, one of my main pain points from my upbringing and my life was I'm not heard. Nobody's listening to me. And so I just talked and talked and talked because I was like hoping somebody would like catch on to something when I was actually being counterproductive.
Think we struggle with that. There's someone, what she does is similar to what you mentioned with your friend. She'll say something, then try to justify it. Say something, then explain it. Say something, justify it. And I remember one time I went to her, she was telling me something. And I was like, okay, I can't wait for the part where you try to justify it. Like, where's the justification part? And she sat back, she's like, oh my God, you're right. And the funny thing is about her, at least what I found funny, was she's trying to justify anything. So it could be like something that's good, and she'll try to justify it and over explain it. It could be something that's bad, same thing. And I asked her, I'm like, why do you think you need to always go out of your way to make sure that the person understands and you're justifying it? And she turned to me and said, you know what, Train? There is things that I want to talk about in my life, and the people around me didn't want to hear it, whether
Yep.
it was good, bad, or indifferent. Do you think that maybe that could be one of the reasons where some people prolong the conversation just because they know in their past no one's actually listening, so it's a way to keep them as close as possible and engage because they know as soon as they stop talking, they're going to disappear.
That's exactly it. And that comes from this unresolved old pain. And it doesn't need to be big, macro traumatic events. Like these are the micro traumatic events that happen as we're getting raised that we internalize and we make stories up about. And then we decide unconsciously, this is all happening under the surface. My feet are currently wrapped around my microphone cord. Okay. Um, I was all bound up there. Uh, and, and so then they create these unconscious patterns that often lead us to behave in ways that we're not proud of. So we have to go back and heal those old wounds, however that ends up looking, whether that's through therapy, whether that's through coaching, whether that's through whatever it is, psychedelics, I don't know. However, everyone there's different ways to climb a mountain, right? But we have to heal those old wounds so that we can come to our conversations, our relationships feeling whole, and then something weird is going to happen where we are going to be heard, even if we're saying less, because we believe we matter more. Our recipient is going to take on that energy too. That's all a bit woo woo, I suppose, but I think it's accurate.
I think so too. I think it's something that maybe we're holding on to, and it's interesting to see how one thing can change someone's entire course. Like you can have someone, they're dating someone and they just don't pay attention. They don't even give the impression that they care about their day, care about their emotional needs, care about their mental requirements. And then you have someone maybe who has had like a difficult childhood, whereas a child maybe they felt like they weren't heard by their parents, or is always my way or the highway. They couldn't even voice anything that they wanted. So when they carry that on into their childhood, they're like, Tanya, help me. I have no idea how to talk to people. I was told how to form words, but I wasn't told how to use my words to express my emotions. And ladies, I know there's a lot of men out there that you're like, oh, Terrain, he doesn't talk to me. How am I going to get him to open up? But I think we have to start by understanding where they are
Yes.
and then try to get them to cross that bridge because we sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, and maybe you are too, we ask people to, instead of making a step forward, we ask them to make a leap. And for some people, it's too
Mm.
far. It's too far of a jump because if they were to take that leap, take that jump, they're thinking, I can't make it. I'm going to fall off the edge of the cliff. I'm going to fall into the pit of spikes. I'm going to not be able to recover. And there's this beautiful picture that I saw. I think it was a meme or a GIF, whatever these youngsters call it, Tanya, these days. And the person, and there's two people, one on one side of there's one person on one edge, and there's another person on the other edge, and there's no bridge. The bridge is damaged. One person reaches out and the person's like, just jump. And the other person who's being told to jump, they're looking at the person and they're looking at the floor. And in their mind, they're like, I just can't make it. Where the other person is looking straight at that person and just saying, I got you. How difficult do you think it is for people to trust again after being so hurt from their past?
Yeah, if that was a message that they never got, that I am stable, solid, reliable, and I got you, if that was something that was missed in their childhood, and very unlikely that it was missed on purpose, but very likely that their caregivers were just acting from their own underdeveloped emotional immaturity, then it's going to be really hard to do that once they leave the family unit and try to go and make their way in the world. It's going to be really hard to be able to accept that hand that's being extended. And we might push it away, we might be violent to it, we might do a lot of things to it because we don't trust that it's actually going to have us. And we can kind of bring this metaphor back into real life. It's the person that might be in a relationship but actually staying quite distant. Maybe that means there's sort of a hyper independence where they're doing most things on their own. They don't want to take the next step and, whatever that means for the progression of the relationship. They don't want to move in, they don't want to get engaged, whatever the thing is. But they find a way of sort of being together but separate because they can't fully put their heart there, put their heart on the line. What if it gets crushed? What if it gets damaged? And we can certainly move through life with those types of fears and questions. And people like Brene Brown would suggest that when we go through life in that way, we're never going to have anything meaningful in our lives. We need that vulnerability to be intimate and to create partnerships. And if you didn't have that modeled to you or taught to you as a child, it is healable. Whatever patterns are playing out now in your relationships for folks listening and watching, it's something that you learned over time. It was something that you practiced well, whether it was avoiding or being really eagerly attached to someone. It's something that you learned to as a way of coping with your situation when you were young. And because it was learned, it's something that can be unlearned. And so approaching that type of unlearning, I think, needs to start with a willingness where you can say to yourself, you know what, I'm willing to change things inside myself. Or if you're not there yet, I'm willing to consider changing things within myself. And just let that be a little mantra. It's like this, I'm, uh, you see a store, you're like, do I want to go in? Maybe after I have lunch, I'll go in. But after a while of telling yourself, I'm willing to consider changing, you can, you'll know that, oh, actually, now there's a willingness to do it. And you can let that be the mantra then for the next little while. I'm willing to change within myself. And eventually, then you're just ready and you can just make the changes and whatever that looks like. If you need professional help, if you can do it on your own.
How scary do you think being confronted with that change is for the person who maybe was aware that they needed to change and they just chose to ignore it, or that someone brings it to their attention and now it's their understanding that, okay, this is a pillar of my relationship that I need to resolve sooner than later?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a fear, I think, around the unknown. That would be a really common general thing to say. And then there's another layer in this. So the unknown being, if I do commit and trust and take that leap, if I do that, I don't know what's going to happen next because I've never had that. I've never had that experience. So there's the fear of the unknown. What does that mean? And then also there's the fear of, well, what if I get hurt? What if we don't know, right? That is a possibility, but who knows? But then there's another layer to this, which is how the unconscious mind prefers the status quo, even though it may not be the most helpful, productive, growth oriented in terms of your own personal development, but because it's comfortable, because it's always been that way. And so our unconscious minds will choose the path of least resistance. And so not only do we need to override these conscious fears of like, oh, what if something happens, but also we have to override this unconscious, deep, anchored desire to stay exactly as we are. So that's hella scary. I mean, I don't, on a scale, I'd put it at like a 10 out of 10 scary.
Yeah, and it's something that you can hold on to for so long. Like we
Yeah.
hear sometimes like the joke that a lot of people spend a lot of time in their own echo chamber, meaning that hanging around with the same people
Mm.
who are stuck in the same mindset, and then there's always the famous quote, right? Misery loves company. So if you're the type of person that doesn't want to change and you have to make a decision, do I hang around people who want to make that change, or do I hang around people who don't want to make that change? Because that could be so much safer for a lot of people. And I can see why there's like this story online where they say single people keep people single
Mm. Hmm.
is because it's easier in the beginning to unite people with a common dislike of something. Meaning that, okay, you know what? I don't want to communicate properly. Oh, I dislike it. It's scary. They should just be able to understand. And then you go to someone like, oh, yeah, I had the same thing. So now you're talking about the same thing you like. But I think it takes more effort and is more long lasting when you unite through love, which is why ideally marriage, for example, when it works, it's such a beautiful thing and it lasts for such a long time. What would you advise to someone who is maybe trapped in a situation where everyone around them is experiencing the same resistance to a change and they don't necessarily want to be like the people around them, but they just don't see an escape because it's so much safer to know the devil that you do know versus the devil that you still have to get to know.
Yeah, facing that type of decision, there's all going to be a lot of struggle with that because you're getting support from that group. There's camaraderie there. There is, friends and allies in that type of environment. And then you have to face the question, well, what am I going to lose if I decide to behave differently, to react differently, to be differently? What am I going to lose? And then looking at that honestly, am I willing to lose those things? When I'm setting goals with my clients, there's 4 questions that we'll go through because we want to make sure that the goal is something that is going to serve them, it's going to benefit them, and also the things that they're going to have to sacrifice to get that goal are going to be worthwhile to sacrifice. And so the first question is, so what are the good things that are going to happen if you do get your goal? What are the positive things that are going to happen if you do get your goal? What are the negative things that won't happen if you do get your goal? What are the negative things that will happen if you do get your goal? And then what are the positive things that won't happen if you don't get your goal? So there are 4 permutations of what seems like the same question, but you get very different responses. And okay, are they willing to give up those things that they're going to actually have to trade? They're going to have to trade for what it is that they want. And that takes a lot of strength. Not everybody's willing to make those types of assessments or changes.
What are maybe then, if you when you present those four ways to do it, and the questions, you're right, they're similar, but they're different in a way because it's what are the negatives that you if you don't get this? What are the negatives if you do get this? Right? And you're identifying what possibly could happen in these four different scenarios when it comes to this. What are maybe some common objections or maybe obstacles that the clients would face when they're presented with these four areas.
Yeah. So if someone's working, say, on a relationship, a primary relationship, some of the good things that they can see happening if they were to get their goal, more intimacy, more connection, more love, partnership, play, adventure, spontaneity. And then some of the things they are going to lose, which they're good to lose, they're okay to lose, are things like, yeah, all the testiness, all the anger, all the rage, all the frustration, all the irritability, all the crankiness, all the like, oh, I said testy already. That one's important. I have
Yeah,
to
they're
say it
double
twice.
testy, double
Yeah,
testy.
you need to. Uh, and then when we face that question of, well, what are you going to lose? And they really look at that, and then there's, they're going to have to lose things like we were talking about before, like maybe they have to lose being right to make these types of connections. Maybe they have to lose that part of their ego that believes, you know, they're above this situation. And when they look at that, they can then make a conscious adult choice about it. Well, these are the consequences. Am I okay with them? Yes, no. And then you can move forward or not, right? I think I was talking to a young patient, a 14-year-old the other day in my naturopathic practice, and we were talking about some food changes. She had some skin stuff that was going on for her that she was rather embarrassed about. Sorry, I just knocked my microphone. That she was rather embarrassed about, and she really likes sugar. I mean, what 14-year-old girl doesn't like sugar? Um, but she seemed very precocious, age before her age or older than her age, if you can understand. Um, and I was like, well, you know what? I think you're old enough to make this type of adult decision. There's a very good possibility that were you to eliminate or decrease, but ideally eliminate the sugar, that your skin's going to heal. Is that something that you would be okay with? She's like, absolutely. And so, would you be willing to consider making that change? Just doing an experiment, just to see how it goes, just to see how it plays out and how your skin responds. And she's like, yeah, I can do that. And so then following up with her later on, things changed. She made this commitment to herself. Things changed. She was very pleased. And she's like, now I don't even want it because I'm so happy with how things are different. And that can be something that we can bring into our relationships too. This story of like just making a commitment of some kind. So maybe it's this. Maybe when your partner comes home after work, or when you come home after work, instead of ignoring each other until it's convenient to be in the same room, find each other and connect. Say, hey, I love you. How was your day? What if you just chose to do that small thing every day for a month? Like, what would be different? It's such a small thing, but has a big ripple effect. I heard it say once, within 5 minutes, you should become within 5 feet for 5 minutes. Does that make sense?
It does, it does. So does that mean that instead of, I don't want to use the word taking for granted, but should we continue to work at the communication like it is something that is an ongoing training instead of just thinking it's a simple matter of just stringing together words?
It is. It is a skill that needs to be practiced, and it gets easier over time. There's some key things that you can do, like I statements. So instead of you pointing the finger, blaming, I feel this when you do this. So this is very different than you make me mad, because that's not how emotions work. I make myself mad based on what I observe, how my unconscious mind filters that, how that changes my physiology. So even just taking the responsibility of how we feel, like I feel this. When you did that, I got angry. That was on me. The anger is on me. When you didn't do that, I felt so hurt. That hurt is mine. Not you made me, you hurt me. Because most of the times, people are very well intended. I mean, yes, there are circumstances where people aren't well and they are more intentionally trying to manipulate and harm people. But the majority of the time, ultimately, people just want to be loved.
I agree. I think we just miss we make it complicated. We make it so complicated. It's sometimes I think if we just took a step back and just asked ourselves, how would I want to be loved?
Yeah.
Answer that question. And then to your point earlier, right? Communication. This is how I want to be loved. And then to your point further, right? I statements. I like it when you do this,
Hmm.
right? But it seems it's more of a struggle. I remember there's one person that said that they should know. So they're literally sitting down, arms crossed, legs crossed like a child, and saying that you need to guess. And then when the person doesn't get it, it's the other person's fault. And I think sometimes we forget that no one is telepathic.
None of us have it figured out, and it's okay to tell what your needs are. I think that's really crucial what you've just hit on. We want, and there's this weird thing, like we want people to know us so deeply and intimately and just have that somehow just have that knowledge when we're not willing to offer it and share it. Like, how is that even possible? It just doesn't even make sense. And it is so childish. That's something that someone just hasn't grown up and out of. Holding on to that idea of like, oh, when I was a baby, my mom was able to anticipate my needs, and therefore every single other human being in my life should do that too. But maybe the mom didn't even know. Maybe the mom was just guessing. Who, like, we don't know, you know? And so, yeah, the expectation that people know how to treat you, how you like what you prefer is preposterous. And I think it's wonderful when we teach people how to treat us. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. What an important conversation to have with people when you are starting to become close with them, friends and lovers.
I always wonder what the fear is. Like if I were to tell someone, treat me this way and they don't do it, I'm no worse off than if I didn't communicate it.
Yes, exactly. You lost nothing and you've gained clarity that that person isn't the right person for you. There's this beautiful way of thinking about boundaries. I used to always think of them as a wall, like this is a barrier here. And I had a friend who's a counselor say this so beautifully. She said, a boundary is not a wall, it's not a barrier. It's a meeting place. It's an invitation. I'm willing to go this far. Will you meet me here? Okay, if they are, cool, keep going. If not, move on. You are better off knowing that early on than spending months, years, decades, because this happens, expecting it or wanting it to be different when you didn't even say what you wanted in the first place.
I like that. Like the boundary, instead of like a lot of people think it's like a wall, as you mentioned, it's, let's say, a destination. Can you meet me here for a
Yeah,
conversation or for a tea or for whatever the case is, right? And if you end up going there and the person isn't there, then that's perfectly fine because it's just like if you're on vacation and the person doesn't show up. You may be sad, you may be disappointed, but ultimately you're still going to do what? Enjoy your time alone,
and
maybe.
now you know.
And now you know. So when maybe someone is not able to commit to that type of level of communication, what would you maybe recommend to the person who is willing but not receiving, and maybe they're thinking, okay, what are my next steps in this situation?
You asked that question in a different way. I want to make sure that I answer it
Absolutely.
in a, yeah.
So I'll give you an example. So
Okay.
I'm able to communicate in a healthy way and I express
Yeah.
my emotions and what I'm looking for, as we talked about, right? This is how I want to be loved. I like it when you do this. Can you do
Yeah.
more of this? But when you communicate that, you're meeting a wall and the person
Mhm.
is unable, not because they don't understand, because they're unwilling.
I see. Yeah, so then like this child and the sugar, you get to make an adult choice. They're not willing. Okay, they're clear. They've set their boundaries. So are you willing to stick around knowing that they're not willing? And if you choose to do that, then that's fully on you. Don't complain to me, please, because you are choosing the scenario that you don't want to be in. You don't have to do that. You can drop it, right? You can just drop it.
As easy as that.
Well, if you're giving something out that's not being received, not because it's the wrong message or the wrong type of message, but because they just don't want it, I mean, what would you stick around for?
I've asked myself that question in my younger years. I've asked other people that question throughout the years. And one answer that I've gotten is that it's complicated. It
Of
usually
course.
isn't. But the reason why I think people use that one is that it gives you a way out without explaining.
Of course, yeah. People are like, oh, I don't want to know. It's complicated. Never mind.
Yeah, they run, right? Like, could you imagine you're on I know you've been married for so long. Could you imagine like you're on a date and someone tells you, "Oh, I'm a complicated man?" You'd be like, okay, bye,"
I think my
basically.
mom's calling. I gotta
There
go.
you go. Pineapple, everyone. That's a secret code. Pineapple
Yeah,
when she
there you
gets that
go.
text. But I think that's why. And I think another reason, and I think this one is maybe more true and something that is more honest, but a lot of people may not share it, is that they know deep down that this relationship or this person isn't for them.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And so are you now speaking from the perspective of the person who's not willing or of the person who's trying to get something, like offering something that is not being received well?
The person who isn't. No, actually, I can look at it probably from both. I'll look at it from the person who is willing, but deep down, I think maybe they know that if they continue trying to get the type of love that they want from this person, they're going to be disappointed. So instead of being disappointed, they rather deal with not getting what they want because at least they're getting something instead of nothing.
Yeah, it's so weird because it's still disappointment though. They're still not getting it's such a what a funny conundrum. Yeah, I think there's also going back to that idea of comfort and people are lonely and they'd rather be with someone like you say than no one. I will say this that when I was out of so before starting to date my husband out of naturopathic college, I was fairly resolved that I was just going to be single forever, have a lot of cats, and meet a lot of cool people to get funky with. And that was that was kind of my life plan, if I'm being honest. And just be a spinster. Like, how fun would that be? And I was so okay with that. I was so okay being on my own, being independent in that way, having whatever freedom. I was so okay with that idea of having no one forever. And that's when love showed up in my life, when I was 100% fully accepting of being alone.
When you weren't looking for it, but you knew what you wanted, but you weren't actively looking for it, the universe, as some people would say, or you're put in a situation to see that there's still the possibility out there that you don't need 1,000 cats living in the shoe house with just yourself and felines.
I mean, it's still a bit enticing, I'll admit, but although having spent a weekend with a couple cats, house sitting, you know, one is good.
I was never a fan of cats.
Not a cat person.
No, I have a dog and that's fine. And she's like upstairs, probably waiting for me to walk her and feed her. But I was never, and I think one of the reasons is because of what it represented, right? Like
What
I
was
think they've destroyed cat ownership. It's like when you go online and you and someone has like a jalapeno in their link tree or in their social media, instead of you thinking, okay, they're into food, you think they're into OnlyFans, for example.
okay?
Right? Like you see how like people have taken things and like kind of made it into something else, right? But cats, yeah, like anytime I speak to like let's say a woman and she's like, "Oh, I have two or three cats." in my mind I've already designed her reality.
Right.
Right? It may not even be true.
Yeah, it may not be. You're making interpretations.
I know, I know. Thank God I've been able to overcome that because I would hate to be looking at people analyzing them in that way. And here I am in a relationship, but unmarried, and they're probably like, okay, he's in his 30s, and he works here. He's like, how come he isn't, married and he has all these things going? And then maybe they start to think, okay, maybe he's this, maybe he's toxic, maybe he's a narcissist, right? Um, Actually, on that note, I'll ask you, like, how does that, how do you think that maybe happens that we start to design something about someone in our minds?
Mm.
And then instead of being able to separate the fantasy or what's in our mind from reality, we begin to think that it is reality. And maybe that can play a part in people not wanting to leave because when they're in a relationship with someone, they have created the type of relationship they want. And now they're just plugging in this person instead of
Mhm.
finding the person that they want to create the relationship.
Right. Hoping the person they're with will one day be that person they desire. Um, yeah. So mm, where do I want to go with this? I I think I think it comes down to this. And part of the problem with how we see other people is that it's all projected from our unconscious mind. What we're thinking about things is not reality. It is a filtered perception. And that filter is based on years and years and years of learning things are a certain way. And now it's like there is this lens that's set up inside and everything's going to and like a belief system, a set of beliefs about how the world works and who the people, who the characters are and what their roles are. And then everything has to match that. Everything has to corroborate that story. We all just start buying into this narrative and don't see things as they actually are. So the answer to your question is quite a complex one to think about, but it's really quite simple to say. And that information comes into our nervous system through our senses. We filter that information, we create a perception, we create an interpretation based on our pain, based on our values, based on our belief systems, and we project that back out, and it's never going to be true or real.
Do you think that is difficult for some people to understand and move forward from?
Yes, because how do you start to separate, or how do you start to put how do you separate yourself from yourself enough to witness the fact that you are doing this unconsciously? You're not intentionally waking up every day saying like, oh, this person is treating me this way. They're, making all those stories up like we were just talking about. We don't wake up thinking that consciously. It's all happening under the surface. So I think it is hard, but there's so many ways that you can change those stories. So many.
So, as we close, Tanya, what's some advice that you want to give those who are looking to heal and make sure that they're not repeating any mistakes from their past in their future relationships?
Yeah, and I would bring it back to that idea of willingness. So something's not working. Are you willing, or are you willing to consider making a change and taking responsibility for your part, for your role, for maybe the persona that you're playing? Are you willing? That's the take home question. Because if you're not, then don't complain about it. If you are and you need help, then get it. If you are willing and you can take steps, then do that.